Hey everyone, this is Kim Seng, aka Captain Kimo from CaptainKimo.com, and in this video tutorial I am doing a recap of last month's live webinar with Topaz Labs titled From Concept to Creation, and in that live broadcast I talked about how I created this photo. And this photo is actually two different photos created from two separate images. This is an elk photo that I took from Yellowstone at Mammoth Springs. And for some of you who don't know, Mammoth Springs is a little town where you can rent cabins, and over there they have tons of elk. And this was probably my best elk shot, the sharpest elk shot at least. And it was easy to get because the elks are right there. So the only problem with that is there's a building in the background, and and that doesn't look too good for a shot like this. So what I did was, later on during my trip, I kept an eye out for a good background that I would be able to use to put this elk into. And I actually eventually found that background out at Moose in Wyoming at the Grand Tetons National Park. So I took this photo. This was right out in front of the visitor center, and I thought this would make a very nice photo for that elk. I created this photo by using various Topaz plugins to get the image the way it is, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So the first thing we're going to do to create this photo is we're going to go to the moose here. I'm going to go back to the moose image. And this is the image that we're going to start working on first, and what we're going to do first here is I'm going to go ahead and crop this first. I'm going to just crop it out right around the moose or the elk, and just crop it not too tight, just so I can get some space. I'm just going to crop it around the elk, and I'm doing this just so the file isn't so large, and it's easier to kind of find out where I want to create the mask. And we're going to create the mask using Topaz Remask. But before we create the mask, I'm just going to go ahead and start cleaning out the image. So we're going to go ahead and do that by using the okay, I'm going to go ahead and crop it. So we're going to crop that, and we're going to go ahead and clean up the image by using the spot healing tool. So I'll click that, and then I'm just going to zoom in on the elk, and we're just going to start cleaning off some of the little spots here. And I do this just to remove any blemishes, and I'll do this first so that it's easier when I start processing the photo, because once I start doing that, if I don't clean up some of the areas, I might make some mistakes, and the blemishes will end up showing up in the final image, and it'll be harder to do later on. So I like to do that in the beginning. And I'm not going to spend too much time here cleaning up the elk shot here. I'm just going to show you what I do here in my workflow. And that looks good, so I'm going to zoom back out. Next, what I'm going to do is I am going to apply a little bit of a Topaz Adjust before I start masking the image. So I'm going to do that. But before I apply Topaz Adjust, I'm going to duplicate the layer here. I use that, make sure I have that background layer selected, and I'm going to hit Control J. It's Command J on a Mac, and it duplicates the layer, makes it the exact same layer. So if you click the eyeball tool here, you don't see any change because it's the same layer. And I do this so I can always go back to the original if I have to. So now that I have a duplicate layer, I'm going to go ahead and apply Topaz Adjust to the image. So I'm going to go up here to Filters and to Topaz Labs and use the Topaz Adjust preset. Now when the Topaz Adjust window is open, the preset I'm going to use here for this particular photo is in the Topaz 4 list underneath the clarity. And this is the clarity preset that I'm going to use. So I'm going to use this because it has a lot of good detail, good contrast. So I'm going to hit OK on this. It looks aggressive now, but what I'm going to do is I am going to actually pull back the transparency on it and do a few masks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just mask the head out. I don't really care too much about detail in the body, just around the head though is where I want to focus on the image. So we're going to do that now. Let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I am going to create a layer mask here. I'm going to click here, and that will create a layer mask for us. And once I have that layer mask created, I am going to use the Control I. It's Command I on a Mac. It's a shortcut here, and make sure you have your layer mask selected, and it will fill in that white layer mask with a black layer mask. And what that does is that hides the layer. So to reveal back the Topaz layer, we're going to use the paintbrush tool, and we're going to use the white color here at about, I think, 20%, and we're just going to make we're going to paint on this layer here, and we need to make the paintbrush a little bigger. Let's see, that'd be good enough right there, about 380. And let's go ahead and just start. I'll go zoom in so you can get a better view here. And then if we use the paintbrush tool, we'll just start painting at 20%, the paint back in that Topaz adjust layer. So then if I click the eyeball tool here, you'll see the difference here. So that kind of gives it a little more contrast in our photo. So I'll do that. Alright, I think that is good for this image. Let's see. So this is before, and then this is after, so that's good. I'm not going to affect the whole photo, just that one elk, the elk head. So that's now that that's done, I am going to use a trick here. Instead of flattening the image, I hit Control Shift Alt E, and what that does is it takes the whole image, flattens it, and creates a composite layer on top. And then I am going to use Topaz Remask on this layer. So we're going to remask or create a mask around our elk, and once we create a mask, we'll take that elk and put it into our background. So to make our mask, we're going to go into Filter, into Topaz Labs, and select the Topaz Remask option. Once we have our Topaz Remask window open, I'm going to go straight to the Compute button here, and I'm going to just start drawing an outline around the elk with the Compute brush. So to do that, I'll zoom in first, and then we can see our brush size. So I want to increase that size a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and just hit the bracket key, Control back bracket, just to make the paint size bigger, or you can adjust it from down here. And then I'll just go around the body of the elk. Now I'm not going to spend too much time being perfect here. I'm actually going to make it a little smaller right around the legs here. And I do that by hitting the forward bracket key. And then I just go around and I just freehand this. You can also, if you hold Shift down, you can click in one point and drag to the next point and click there, and that will make a straight line. That's another way of doing it. I like doing it that way because it's actually a little easier. Like so. So we'll make the brush a little smaller, and I'm just going to freehand this bottom portion, and then we'll just draw around the elk. This is the easier part here. The harder part is going to be creating the mask around the elk horns, which is coming up soon here. So I'm done here. I'm going to just stop here and go over to this side, go back to this side here, and I'm just going to freehand a Compute brush around the little hair area. And I'm just going to make this brush a little smaller and just drag around the outline of the elk head. And now we get into the more delicate part, which is the horns. So we're gonna actually zoom in a little more, and I'm going to make the brush size a little smaller, probably just a tad smaller here, about that size, and I'm just going to hold the Shift button and just travel around the horns of the elk. And I like holding the Shift button just to make it easier on me. Sometimes freehanding can be a little intense on the mouse. And if some of you are wondering, I am actually using a Kensington trackball. It's one of the bigger ones, and that actually helps me to produce better lines, and it's easier on my wrist. as a graphic designer, that's how I started learning using a trackball, because most graphic designers use trackballs. And if you were to use a mouse, this just would be super intensive, and I would probably have carpal tunnel by this time. But using the trackball has saved me from any kind of injury of that nature. So we're almost done here. I'm just gonna go really quickly around the horns here. You can see how or why this is intensive. This is just, but you know, if I were to do this manually, just a regular mask or with just an eraser erasing the background, that would take me forever. This is just so much easier. Remask itself is worth the price of the Topaz bundle, just in saving the time that it takes to do this. So we are almost there. I think this is the last horn, the last bend here. So let's go ahead and go around that real fast. And oh, I lied. I guess we got one more bend here. And we're almost there. And we are done. I'm gonna zoom out. Next I'm gonna do a compute brush around this area here of the horns, so we can oh, let me undo that. So we're gonna cut this out, this portion out. We don't want this. Okay, and there's one other area here, right around here. You can see the there's a small gap here. We're just going to outline around that, and that is good. Next, I'm going to use the fill here, the red fill tool. This is the cut tool, and I'm just gonna, let me zoom out so you can see this better. I'm gonna hit it right there, and it's gonna fill in the background. And the red means that is the area that we don't want. So that's good. And I'm just gonna use this right here because I don't want that, so we'll click there, and then we'll go up to the horns. I'm going to click here and click here, so we're almost done. Next we're going to hit the compute here button, and Topaz Remask will compute our mask here, and you can see the outline. This is our mask, and this is what it's going to keep. This is the image it's going to keep. So I like this. Next I'm going to zoom in, and you can see the mask up close. It looks good. Again, I'm not going to spend time, you know, perfecting this mask. I can do that forever, so I won't do that. So I'm going to zoom out, and what I'm going to do is I am going to use the keep tool here and zoom out, and then I'm going to make the brush a little bigger, because what I want to do here is I'm just going to keep some of the grass here, and I'm doing that so I can blend this grass into the photo, and it'll help actually make the image look better than trying to blend the grass from the background onto the foot. So I'm doing this so that it will actually look a little more natural when we put the background and the elk together. So that looks good. So it's something like this will be okay. So I'll zoom out, and that's our that's what we got to work with. And let's go ahead and click OK. Now that we have our mask, I'm gonna go ahead and show you the mask real faster. This is our mask, and what we're gonna do is we're just gonna select all. So I do Control A for selecting all, Command A on a Mac, and hit the copy button. So Control C or Command C on a Mac, and we're gonna copy and paste it onto our background here. So we're gonna go ahead and paste it right onto this background of this image, and we're going to, the first thing we're going to do now that we have the elk on here is do a little transform. I'm just going to hit Control T, Command T on a Mac, and I am going to change the size here. I'm going to change it to 70% and 70% horizontal and vertical. That's the size that I'm going to want this photo. I've actually done this already, so I know the size that I want, and that looks good. So now I'm just gonna move the elk around, right around the bottom of the photo, right around here, and it looks good right about there. So I'm just gonna hit the enter and place the elk right in the photo. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to want to blend in the grass here with the grass in the image. So to do that, I am going to use the layer hue and saturation layer, and I'm going to click that, and I'm going to click the use previous layer, and this just only affects the elk layer, so it doesn't affect the background. By clicking that, it only affects the elk layer. So we're going to create this and make it one solid color. So I'm going to click here, and it makes the elk layer one solid color, but I just want to affect the grass. So right now I'm just going to focus on making this grass match that grass. So I do that by just adjusting the settings here. And right there looks good. So next we're going to invert this layer mask here. I hit Control I, Command I on a Mac, and that will hide that effect for that layer. So I'm going to zoom in on the grass, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit or use the paintbrush tool and make sure it is white on the foreground color, and we're going to go to 100% here, and we're going to just start painting in that area for the grass. And notice it just starting to blend in here into the background, so it looks like one solid image. Okay, so that looks good. Next we're going to use the layer mask here. So I'm going to select the elk layer right here. This is the elk layer. I'm going to add a mask here. So I'm going to add a mask onto the elk layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the black, make sure the foreground is a black color, and we're going to go in and use the paintbrush tool at about 10%, and we're going to paint in the edges of the right along the edges here of the mask. Actually 20%. I'm going to move that to 20 and paint along the edges here of our mask, and that will slowly, instead of that hard line, it will blend in the background to the grass of our elk. So now it looks a little more natural. So I'm going to move that to 30. I changed this by hitting the number button. So if I wanted 50%, I could just hit the 5, or 60, hit the 6, 70, and so on. 0 will make it 100%. I'll use 50% for this, just to make it a little faster. And now I'm just going to go back to the 20% here, because I'm going to just refine the area right here, and that looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. Now that we have our image sort of kind of blended together a little better, we're going to go ahead and start processing the photo. And the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to duplicate the background layer here, and I'm going to add a little bit of a foggy effect to the background. So I do that with the Topaz lens effect. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Topaz lens effect, and once the Topaz lens effect filters up, we're going to use the fog filter here. I'm going to click that, and we're just going to use the fog 2 or fog 1. I'm going to go ahead and use fog 2 filter and hit OK. And so that gives it a little bit of a fog effect in the background. Now we're going to create a composite layer, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to select the utmost top layer here, and I'm going to click the Control Shift Alt E again, and that's going to create a composite layer for the image. And I am going to use the fogged effect again, and this will be for the foreground of the image. So I'm going to go ahead and go into Topaz Labs and hit the Topaz lens effects again, And when I have the Topaz lens effect open, I'm going to use one of the ground fog here. Let me just play around with it. And I am going to use the last ground fog here. That looks good. So I'm going to click on that and hit the OK button. Now that I have my fog looking nice, I am going to use the paintbrush tool to paint back in some of the and make sure it's on black here. I'm going to add layer mask to the composite layer here, and I'm going to use the paintbrush tool, make sure it's on black, so that 20% is good for the opacity. And I'm going to click on the layer mask. I'm going to paint back in this area of the head just so that we can get some better clarity on the head, get that fog out of the head, basically the fog effect. And that looks good. So let me do it before after here. So this was before and this is after. So we have a nice looking elk head. So I'm going to zoom out, and we are going to darken the layer a little bit, and I'm going to darken the layer by adding a curves layer adjustment. So I'll go down here to add a curves layer adjustment, and then I'm just going to pull it down a little just to darken up the image. And that looks good, but now I've darkened up the elk head, which I don't want, so I'm going to use the paintbrush tool, black at 20%, zoom in on the elk head again, and I'm just going to paint that area back in just so that we have a better view of the elk head. And I think that looks good. Let me zoom out real fast, and let's hit the before and the after. And that'll work, so I'm going to go out and zoom all the way out there. Next we're going to do another composite layer, so I am going to hit the Control-Shift-Alt-E, create a composite layer, and then I am going to use Topaz Adjust on that layer. So I'm going to go into Filters, in the Topaz Labs, and hit the Topaz Adjust window here. And now we're going to go into the Classic Collection, and I will select the Brilliant Warm here on the preset, the Brilliant Warm preset. And now I am going to play around with the adaptive exposure a little bit. So let me play around with it, and I swear I like it up a little, so I'm going to pull it up some. And then I am going to maybe bring the contrast down. I'm going to bring the contrast down. This will help bring out the colors in the image. And that's good. I'm going to close this and close the window, the global adjustment tab. I'm going to close that out and go into finishing touches, and we're going to use the warm option to warm up the image a little more. Okay, so that looks a little better. And the last thing I'm going to do here is add a little vignette to the photo, and we're almost done. And that looks good. So here is the before, and now here's the after. So now I'm done with Topaz Adjust. I'm going to click the OK button. Now that we've added Topaz Adjust, I'm going to duplicate this layer, and we're going to use this layer to create a little bit of an Orton effect, which will give us a very dreamy, fantasy-like look. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the layer, select that layer, and go into Filters and Topaz Lens Effect to create a blur. And I'm going to use the bokeh SLR lens option with the Canon 135 f2, and I'm going to click OK on that. Now it's blurred, but I'm going to change the transparency mode here. I'm going to change it to soft light, and this gives it kind of a fantasy, dreamy-like look. And that looks good, but it might be a little too intense, so if it's too intense, you can just bring it down the opacity. And usually I like it around 30 to 40%, but for this image I'm actually going to bring it to about 75, 80. I will stick with 75. And now that we've done that, this is the before and then this is the after, and I like it. The only problem is that the elk head is a little dark, and I'm going to want it a little brighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the curves layer to do that. I'm going to go ahead down here and add a curves layer, and I'm going to just bring it up and this will brighten up the, I'm just focusing on the head and on how bright I want it, and this is about how bright I want it. So I'm going to click on that layer again, hit Control I, Command I on a Mac. Let's go ahead and zoom in here, and then we're going to use the paintbrush tool. It'll have to be white this time, and 20% is good, and we're just going to go ahead and paint back in the brightness of that area. So I'm zooming out a little bit here. And we're just gonna go ahead and lighten up the head. And I believe that is good. So let me zoom out. So this is that's the before, and then this is the after. So now that that's done, I am going to want to darken the body of the elk, because the body of the elk is kind of bright. It's kind of drawing my eye towards the body of the elk instead of the head. So what I'm going to do is I am going to darken the layer. I'm not going to use curves. I'm actually going to create a composite layer, and this will give me a layer to work with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blur this layer with the Topaz lens effect, and we're going to give it a lens blur, the same lens blur we use for the Orton effect. And now I'm going to use multiply here, and this will darken up our whole image, but I just want to affect the body of the elk. So what I'm going to do is add a layer mask and hit Control I to hide everything, and I'm going to use the paintbrush tool again to kind of paint back in the dark areas of the elk, and I believe 20% is good. So I'm just going to paint around this area and just darken up the body of the elk. And it's looking good. I like it darker, so let me just paint in the legs a little here. So that looks good. So this is the before, and then this is the after, and it looks better now that my eye isn't being drawn towards the body of the elk. Okay, so now the fun begins. We're going to add a little bit of a light source to the image, and before we do that, we're just going to hit the Control Shift Alt E to create a composite layer. And then we're going to go into filters to, I believe it's render here, lens flare, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of a 105 prime into the I'm going to move it right here. You can actually, let me brighten it up a little bit so you can see it a little better. About 150. I'm going to just type that in, and then I'm going to move it right to the corner of the photo here, and that will give us a nice light source coming into our image. So I'm going to hit OK, and now we have this nice very portrait-like light coming into our image. So this is the before, and then this is the after. Alright, so that looks good, but what's light without some light rays? So I'm going to show you how to add some light rays here. So the first thing we're going to need to do is add a new layer. I'm just going to click this button down here on the layers palette, and it's going to give us a new layer, and we're going to want to add some texture into that layer to build our light. So I'm going to go into render clouds, and that will just give us something to work with. It's mainly just to build our clouds, so we're going to go into blur now from there, and we're going to use the radio blur. So I'm going to click that, and then we'll get this option here. I want the blur amount to be all the way up to 100, and we need it to be in the zoom area here, and then we're going to hit OK. And this will give us somewhat of a ray. You can see it looks sort of kind of like a ray, but there's some blotchiness to it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to right back into filters, and the top of the filter is the previous filter that you use, so, and that would be radio blur, and we're just going to click that again, and it's going to blur our image again. And I'm going to do this a few times. So notice the ray is starting to get smoother, so I'm going to do it a few times and just keep hitting radio blur. Probably going to do this 3 or 4 times before the ray starts to look nice and without any blotchiness. Okay, so one more time, and that should do it. Okay, so that looks good. So we're going to go ahead and use that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the transparency mode and use linear light, and you can see it looks like rays bursting out of the elk, and we don't want it bursting out of the elk, we want it to burst from the light source. So I'm going to zoom out to give you a better view of what I'm going to do, and hit the Control T, Command T, or on a Mac, and we'll zoom out a little further here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the Shift button and just kind of this will lock in the transform aspect ratio. I'm just going to move it up here. So now it looks like the sun ray is blasting from our light source here. So now you can move it around and just kind of find a point where it looks nice. And I'm just gonna leave it right there. That looks good. So I'm gonna hit enter here. Now we'll just zoom in here. And this is the before, and this is the after our light rays here. Next, what I'm going to do is I am going to add a layer mask again here for the light rays, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the gradient tool here and have the black and white gradient, and I am going to just kind of drag a gradient here. Just kind of, you can see here the rays are showing up over here, so I'm going to drag it in the other end here, because I want the rays to come in, but I want it to kind of fade as it's coming in, so that kind of looks a little more natural. So now here's the before, and then this is the after. So now what I want to do is I want to duplicate this layer here. This would be the layers with the light source, so I'm going to duplicate that layer. Let me click that layer back on. I'm going to bring this on top of the layer here, and then I'm going to change this transparency mode. I'm going to change it to lighten, and what this does is this just lightens up some of the dark areas of our rays here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the light rays here. I'm going to click on that layer mask, and I am going to use the paintbrush tool and use the black color at about 20%. That looks good. And I'm going to go to the corner here, and I'm just gonna paint back in this area here because I kind of want it to look a little smoother, and that looks good. So alright, so that is starting to look very nice, and we're actually almost done. Next, we're going to add a little bit of a warm light to the image, give the light some color, and this will also blend the image together, kind of blend the tones together. So we do this by, or I'll do this by hitting the gradient map, using the gradient map tool here. And once I get my gradient map here up, I'm going to click this little area here to hit the little blue, red, and yellow gradient. Hit OK on that, and then we're going to bring down the opacity here. I'm going to want to play around with it to kind of get it where I want the opacity. So I think 15 is good. So this is before, then this is after. But now I want to kind of play with the color of the light by using the gradient tool. I'm just going to click on the mask here, the layer mask, and just drag a area here because I kind of just want the area of the light being warm. So this is before, and then this is the after, and that looks good. So notice the image is kind of coming together. It's looking like one solid image, and that is good. So what we're going to do now is create a composite layer. I'm going to darken the whole image by using a multiply layer here. So I'm going to use the Command Shift Alt E or Control Shift Alt E on a PC, and it will create our composite layer here on top. And I am going to go into the layer option and use multiply to darken the image. Now I'm going to pull back the opacity because I don't want it too dark, and just enough here just to give it some rich colors. And that looks good, only that the elk head is a little darker than I want, so I'm going to add a layer mask, and we are going to use the black color so that we can paint back in that dark spot of the head that might be affected with the layer here. So that's before, and then this is after. Okay, so now I'm just going to use a quick curves layer and just pull down the colors a little, and we're going to hit the mask here. I'm going to use the paintbrush tool on black at, do 100%, and I'm just going to brighten up this center of the image here, and then I am going to maybe bring it down to about 50%, just to get the center of the image a little brighter. Alright, so that looks good, and now I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to use the paintbrush tool, and we're just going to paint black. Hit the black tool here. I'm going to go, I think 5% might be good, and we're just going to select that layer, and we're just going to paint around this bottom area, and I'm just going to kind of create a little bit of a shadow just to make the image look a little more natural right around this area here. So that looks better. So this is before, and then this is after. And then we can also play with the opacity if we might have gone a little too overboard with that, the painting of the shadow. So 70% looks better. Next, what we're going to do is this is going to be the last step here. We're going to add a color balance to the image, just to straighten out the color balance. It looks good right now, but once you play with the color balance, you kind of notice a little bit of a difference in the image. So I'm just going to play. The color balance has 3 different areas that you can adjust. You got shadows, you got midtones, and you have a lot of highlights. I'm going to just start with the midtones. So that looks good for midtones. I'm going to go up to shadow and play with that. And now shadow looks good. Now I'm going to play with the highlights. And I'm just doing all this by eye, so it's really up to the artist, the photographer, to adjust it to how they see fit. And I think that looks good. So let's see the so that was the before. It was very reddish, and then this is the after, so it's a little cooler. What I'll do here now is I'll play around with the opacity to kind of like it, to see where I kind of like it. Maybe if I like it more towards that cool area, more towards the reddish area. So kind of like a blend of the two. About 50% is good. So I'm just gonna type in 50, and we'll leave it at that. Alright, well that's pretty much it for this tutorial. We came from basically just this plain old elk photo to producing something like this, to producing a work of art. So what we did here, so I'm just going to go ahead and show you the steps we went through here. So we took that ordinary elk, we pasted it into our background here, and then we used hue and saturation to blend in the little grass area of the foot, and then we added some fog in the background, and we created a composite layer and added some fog in the foreground here. And to start building the photo, we start by curves layer. We added a curves layer, darkened it up a little bit, and then we went into Topaz Adjust, and we added a Topaz Adjust layer to this and used Topaz Adjust to really make the image pop. Next, we did a little bit of an Orton effect by using Topaz Lens effect to give us a really dreamy like image. And then we went into the curves layer to brighten up the head of the elk a little more. And then we wanted to focus on the head of the elk, so we made the body of the elk darker. And then we created a composite layer to give us a light source coming in from the top right side there. And then we added some rays to the image just to give us some more drama to the image. And then we use a simple layer here just to kind of blend in some of the light. And then we gave the light some color, some more warm tones, by using a gradient map. And then we created a duplicate layer and used multiply to darken up the whole image, except for of course the head. And then we use a curves layer to darken up the top portion and the bottom portion of our photo to kind of draw the eye towards the middle of the photo. and then we added a little bit of a shadow to the photo, and finally we did the color balance, because after using gradient map and a few other tools, it tends to offset the color balance a little bit. So by fixing the color balance, we kind of gave the image a nicer tone. And that is pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to know more about Topaz, go to topazlabs.com to see their software. And if you want to visit my blog, it's captainkimo.com. I have a ton of videos and photos that I post every day, so visit my website at captainkimo.com. And until next time, this is Kim Seng signing out.